Michael, what's up, man? Good to see you. Are you in Florida now?
I'm in Florida. Yeah, I'm down here training for a week, and then I go back home for a couple days, spend my last couple days with the family, and then down here in Florida for 9 weeks training for November 6th.
Yeah, man. I'm excited for you. How's things been going?
Good, man. Fought for the title in May, which was obviously the epitome of opportunity in this sport, fighting for the UFC title. Fell short, lost the fight. But luckily I've had a couple months now to, recalibrate, reassess, refocus. Spent a lot of time with my family, which is such a good thing, but it's also a tough thing too, because you go away from them again. And I'm down here in my training camp home down in Florida, and it just reminds you of those painful feelings of what it's going to be like being away from the family, especially when you've been with them for so long. I was in training camp for like 16 months, essentially 4 fights back to back to back. So I almost numbed myself a little bit to the pain, or the pain of being away from my family. But then I got to spend a ton of time with them, so now it's even harder. So it's always a constant up and down, ebb and flow, each different season of this career that I've been in now for 13 years. But it's a huge blessing, and I get to do awesome stuff like talk to you, and I can't wait to get this conversation going. So.
Man, it's such a weird dichotomy because you hate to say things like, or even allude to the fact that maybe your family is distracting you from training, because that's not the right thing to say, but it's such a weird dichotomy to want to be fully vested and there and present with your family. But somebody like yourself, who is so driven and so motivated and has so many goals and ambitions within your career, it's got to be a really strange thing with both desires just tugging on each other.
It is too, because it's the two extremes. I take being a father and being a husband so seriously, but then also when it comes to my training and all of the hours and the disciplines and the training and the recovery that it entails, and the sacrifice that it entails, they're two complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And they really, truly, for me, I've never had to live with them both coinciding. I've always kind of been away from my family for 8 weeks at a time, 10 weeks at a time. And luckily for me, Florida's not very far from Nashville, so I'm able to go home every weekend. But there's a part of you every single day that wonders, everybody, you've heard it probably 1,000 times on this podcast and just listening to other people. You don't want to miss your child growing up. You don't want to miss those milestones. You don't want to miss that time. Same thing with dating my wife. And, when I stood there at the altar with her and promised her I was going to love and protect and take care of her and serve her the rest of my life, that was a promise that I made that I want to make good on.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you leave her for weeks at a time and months at a time? And whenever we adopted my son back in 2017, he didn't know what I was saying, but I looked him in the eyes and said, buddy, I'm going to love you and serve you and lead you and take care of you the best of my ability for the rest of your life till my dying breath. So you make that promise, but then in order to put food on the table, in order to truly serve them and take care of them and set them up the way that you know that you need to, it also, one of the byproducts of that is me being away. And so it's a constant, revolving door of emotions that I do really well with a lot of the times, but admittedly do not do well with sometimes, because I want to be a man of my word. Especially I want to be a man of my word to you, let alone my wife and my son, who I made this commitment to. So it's a hard process, but it's eventually I'll look back when I retire and I take those gloves off for the last time in some arena somewhere, and I will know without a shadow of a doubt that I did everything that I possibly could within the sport of mixed martial arts, and I put my best foot forward. And sometimes that was being selfish so that I could be selfless for my family. And I just I pray that when that day comes, I don't have any regrets, and it's I'm doing the best that I can. That's why you just got to pray for wisdom every single day, and how to handle it all.
Yeah, wisdom. And I think also the ability to communicate it effectively, because I wanted to ask how your wife handles it all. We obviously, as men that have conflicting desires at times, can justify is not the right word, but come up with a scenario why it makes sense and why we're okay with it. But then our wives may interpret that differently. How does she handle that when you're gone for 8, 9, 10 weeks?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I do think the word justify is a word that you kind of have to look at and say that kind of what it is, but it's justifying through love, and it's justifying through purpose. There's a difference between justifying why you didn't do something because you made an excuse, or why you have to do something when it's really an excuse and it's somewhat an empty promise. But luckily for me, my wife is a career woman. My wife works full time and has two different jobs, and it's not because she needs to work. I've been afforded great opportunities with the sport of mixed martial arts. She could be a stay-at-home mom if she wanted to, but she was a life. She spent her first 20 something years of her life in medicine and working towards medicine, and works in medicine now. So she understands it. As much as women and men are different in so many areas, I think me and my wife are very equally yoked when it comes to work. And we even kind of came up with this saying in the last couple months, like grind until we're 50. Like we want to just grind until we're 50. We've made a commitment. We're going to grind until we're 50, both hoping and knowing that hopefully it's before 50, but grind as hard as we possibly can till one day we could say, you know what? I'm not going to take this job, this opportunity. I'm not going to take this appearance. I'm going to be done with fighting when I want to be done with fighting, not because I have to continue to do a paycheck. And same thing with her. So we're very equally yoked when it comes to supporting one another's workaholic tendencies. I identify myself as a guy who tries not to, but I very much toe the line of workaholism,
for sure.
And my wife does as well. So in a weird way, since we're both wired that way, we find empathy and we find grace in certain scenarios. Where like just today, I was speaking to her on the phone and she added 3 more things to her plate that I can't tell her she's doing anything wrong, because I probably would have done the exact same thing. So I find these moments of grace and almost just empathy, because I also understand why she does it, and when she does it, and I also trust her to make the right decisions for her well-being. Because me taking away her career would absolutely send her into a downward spiral. I want her to have her career. I want her to be away from me if she has to be away from me to go work, because that's her purpose. So it's a delicate dance, and we've done a pretty good job of it. And I can't say it hasn't been tough at times, because it sure as heck has. And but we work through it just like every marriage.
I do like that you're talking about the fact that you understand each other. And although you're on different pursuits, you're walking through life together, but you understand what she needs. She understands what you need. And so there seems to be just some level of understanding and comprehension about, okay, well, yeah, he's going to do this thing. It doesn't mean he doesn't love me. She's going to do this thing. It doesn't mean she's not interested in the relationship. She just has her own pursuits. You have your own pursuits, and it seems to work out pretty well.
1,000%. And I think I try not to live in regret ever. But I think it's healthy to look at the future and how you could regret something. And by unpacking that, I mean, if I don't do everything I possibly can in this career, it's inevitable that when I take those gloves off for the last time, I will look back and I will regret. And it's kind of like me going to the UFC. I was in Bellator for a very long time. I was an indispensable asset. I was kind of one of the faces of Bellator. I was being taken care of very well, but I knew that the 40-something-year-old Michael would be laying on a pillow at night that felt like a cinder block every single night, because it would constantly be wondering, what if I would have went to the UFC? Same thing with this career. If I don't pour everything into it, I don't want to take the chance of me having those regrets. I mean, I could very easily be in Nashville. I own a gym in Nashville, Tennessee. I don't have the coaches or the training partners or the opportunities that I have in Nashville that I have here in Florida. Therefore, I make the sacrifice to come to Florida to mitigate that risk of having that regrets at the end of my career. Same thing with my wife. If I said, hey, babe, we are taken care of, bank accounts are doing good, investments are doing good, you don't have to work, why don't you just spend more time at home and take that away from her? It might be okay for a second, she'll stuff it down. Might be okay for another season, she'll stuff it down, but eventually that boils over. And then now we've put ourselves in a scenario where by taking away her purpose and taking away her passion and taking away her vision for what she wants to be is not only going to affect her personally, but it's going to affect our relationship. And that's not a place that you want to be. And that hasn't happened but I could very well see so clearly in the future the regrets and the turmoil that would ensue had we made those decisions based on, you know, taking those things away from her. So that's what we've done, and we keep throwing ourselves more and more into things, and it's a beautiful, crazy chaos, but we do pretty well in the chaos.
Yeah, you know, you talk about regrets for her, and not only would there be her regrets, there might be your regrets for potentially being the one who, you know, caused that for her not to be able to chase and pursue her dreams. But then also there would be a level of potential contention, right? So, well, you know, the reason I left my career is because Michael asked me to, or Michael wanted me to do this, or he wanted to take this direction. And I see this a lot with couples where they don't talk about these issues. They don't communicate it very well. And then there is just a lot of animosity and contention that builds up over years, if not decades. And you see marriages that have lasted 30 years, all of a sudden, you know, they crumble because they never had these conversations. And there's just this contention that is just built up between the two.
Yeah. And that's a place. And there's been moments, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, not to get too personal into our relationships, but obviously we moved, you know, we started our life together in San Diego. We moved from San Diego, where she had friends, had a job, had everything. And then we moved because of my career. And then we made another decision based upon my career. So it's not 100% 50-50 when it comes to us making decisions. Obviously, if I am the breadwinner and I have a short window of opportunity to make the greatest impact I possibly can with these abilities that God has given me. So therefore the decision making kind of lends itself towards my career. So it's constant, you know, even to this day, I just now signed my bout agreement a couple days ago, 2 days ago, for this next fight. And it's been kind of in limbo for the last couple of weeks. So you don't know exactly when you're going to get the phone call, when you're going to training camp, when you're leaving your family. So my career upends a lot of the normalcy and kind of the security of not having to make quick decisions. We constantly have to do that, you know? And I think one thing that I think couples a lot of times forget too in relationships is we kind of think we come together and then we make every decision based on this union that we've created, you know, before God. Right. And while that is extremely true, we both still are children of God. She has her own life goals, ambitions, passions, and purposes, and I have the exact same thing. So we should also be pursuing those things to the best of our ability and never letting each other hold each other back. And there's been so many times where, man, you'd be surprised as a man, if you stay silent and stay quiet on the things that you may or may not disagree, that you may disagree with, only to let your wife go pursue something. Even if it does or does not work out, no matter what, you gave them the opportunity. You gave them the keys to the kingdom to go do what they felt in their heart. And I think that gets missed a lot of times in marriages because we think, okay, now we're married and now we have to make every decision based upon this marriage. And while that is always true, we should always be thinking about the healthiness of the marriage and the thriving nature of a marriage. You're still two individuals that need to continue to pursue those passions. And even me now, a man, one of my favorite books of all time is John Eldridge, Wild at Heart. And he says, every man needs a battle to fight and an adventure to have and a beauty to win. Well, I won the beauty, right? I got her and I love her and she loves me. And thank God we have a phenomenal marriage, but I'm still always, even after this career is done, I need an adventure to have and I need a battle to fight. So if she takes those things away from me, it's going to only end up in me becoming a subpar version of myself. And right. There's another book that John Eldridge and his wife wrote called Captivating. And I'd be lying if I said I read it, which I probably should have read it just to understand the woman's soul more. But there's another 3 things that a woman is designed by. So us as a marriage, those are 2 great books, one for the male, one for the female, to realize how we are designed, because we're designed differently in so many different ways. And it's about the yearning to learn about your partner, the yearning to learn about his or her aspects of life and to make them the best person they possibly can be. Because, you know, happy wife, happy life. You know, you've heard it said 1,000 times. I want my wife to be as happy as possible so we can thrive and have a blast together.
I'm glad you're talking about Wild at Heart, because that book actually transformed my life as well. John's been on the podcast a couple of times now.
Dude.
He's an incredible human. You did say something I wanted to challenge a little bit. You said, if I allow my wife to take that thing away, I would contend that maybe we as men don't allow our wives to take it away necessarily, but we give it away, right? We say,
Yep.
well, I guess I'm not going to pursue my dreams because, and we come up with all these reasons. And then what we end up doing, I think a lot of the times, is looking back on it and saying, well, my wife, she wanted me to do this. And we put it on her shoulders when it was us who actually relinquished control or gave up a bit of ourselves or a bit of our dreams. And then now we're putting the responsibility on her shoulders, and it's not hers to bear.
Yep, and you used the perfect word earlier, communication. I think it's communication and trust. I think my wife and I have a huge trust in each other's abilities to make decisions, already knowing that we've already thought about how it's going to affect the family, how it's already going, I've already thought about how it's going to affect my son, my wife, our income, our future, our household. I've already thought about those things. And by her even questioning it, of course, me as a man, I'd probably be like, after almost 10 years together, how do you not understand that I've already thought about that? So instead of getting defensive about it, right, you need to build that trust. Does your wife always know that even if you're making a selfish decision, you've already thought about those things and how it's going to affect all those different things? And it always comes back down to communication. Us as men, we're not the best communicators. I was a horrible communicator, and even just a problem solver and a bad de-escalator. I grew up in a household where my mom and dad are still together to this day, but their conflict resolution skills were not always the best. They would
Sure.
they would
Yeah.
they would fight. They would fight. There would be conflict. It wasn't nasty fights, but it was more just disagreements. And they would come together and they would disagree. And then dad would say, okay, I'm going to bed. You're always right. And then mom would say, okay, fine. I'm going to hang out here for another couple hours, hang out with the kids, put the kids to bed. So I never saw two adults and human beings saying, okay, I believe X and you believe Y. Let's hear each other out and let's de-escalate this, because no matter what, I love you and I want to figure out how I can make you maybe see my viewpoint, but I also am open to seeing your viewpoint. And so that's how I was kind of raised, or through osmosis, that was what was ingrained in my mind on how
Sure.
adults
Right.
how adults and relationships worked. And so I had to do a lot of work, and it took a lot of courage to break out of that shell and break out of that thinking. And trust me, I still to this day struggle with it. I still to this day need to be better at it. But communication is paramount when you talk about having a healthy relationship. So that's something I'm working on every single day.
Yeah, well, as am I, as are all of us to varying degrees. I think that's one of the
Yeah.
things that we talk about on this podcast all the time, is just making sure we're communicating, we're keeping the other person in mind. That's important. One thing you talked about a minute ago is you were talking about your transition from Bellator to UFC. You were at the top of your game in Bellator, as high as you could go, multi-time champion. Why make that shift over to UFC? Why the timing? Tell me a little bit about that transition for you.
Man, well, I'll start out by saying it was the best decision I could have possibly made. But it was a scary one, but you can't get
No
to
doubt.
the position of saying, wow, I made the best decision possible, without taking that leap, without taking a chance on yourself. Yeah. I mean, I could have spent the next 4 or 5 years, my last couple contracts with Bellator, I helped kind of build the organization, not from a managerial standpoint or anything, but I was one of the homegrown guys, one of the guys who's been in 3 of the biggest and best fights in Bellator history, millions and tens of millions of views on YouTube that they've gotten from my past fights with Eddie Alvarez and a couple other ones. So I kind of became the guy who helped build this organization, and I loved them. They loved me, but it just got to the point where I just felt this yearning, and it goes back to a decision I made when I was 18 years old. So to go back to that moment, I wasn't a huge standout wrestler. I wasn't a state champion, but I was pretty good, pretty talented, and I had a work ethic that would rival anybody's. And I knew I could compete at the Division I level. So I was getting scholarship opportunities, full ride scholarship offers to Division III and Division II, NAIA, junior college schools, and everybody around me, from mom and dad to coaches to my teammates to everyone in my circle, said, you know, why don't you just take this opportunity, take this full ride scholarship? You're not going to have to pay for school, not going to have to do anything. But for some reason inside of me, taking that more safe, more stable route didn't sound as appealing as walking on to the University of Missouri, taking a chance on myself, taking a leap of faith. And maybe I go to the University of Missouri and I'm there for 5 years and I never set foot on the mat with that black and gold singlet as a starter. Maybe I ride the bench for 5 years. Maybe I'm just a training partner for 5 years. Heck, maybe like a lot of the guys I came with, I would quit after a couple of weeks and say, shoot, you know, it was coach's fault, or it was this guy's fault, or, you know, they didn't pay any attention to the walk on. But for some reason, I took that chance on myself. And that was the single most important decision that I ever made in my athletic career. So then you fast forward 12 years later, here I was in the same exact position where I could take the more safe, the more secure route, be the big fish in a smaller pond, be taken care of, be one of the top guys, or I could basically throw myself into the lion's den that is the UFC lightweight division with some of the biggest names on the planet. And you know, obviously it comes down to contracts and the money has to be right, and so you have to make the right decision financially for your family, of course. And it was the right opportunity with the right offer, and took a chance on myself. But it was so scary because essentially I had worked all this time and I knew my position where I was. I had the security of longevity with Bellator, but I had to, like, once again, I was in a position to look to the future Michael and say, the 40-year-old Michael is going to be laying on a bed at night with a 40-pound cinder block underneath his head, not being able to get a good night's sleep if I don't take this chance on myself. 18-year-old Michael did it, and it was the best decision he ever made. So now 30-something-year-old Michael needs to walk another mile in those footsteps, take a chance on myself, and it's worked out extremely well. And God's given me an awesome platform now, and it's been a blast, man.
Well, we've watched your couple of fights in UFC. I say my two oldest sons and I, we enjoy watching you fight, and we love just your energy, and the way that you show up and the way that you train is amazing. As you came into UFC, you've made some bold assertions as to what your career is going to look like with UFC. And what was it, several months ago, 5-6 months ago, had, a little bit of a setback with Oliveira. Tell me about that and where you go after making these assertions, coming into that fight, not going the way you wanted it to after the first round. That first round was solid for sure, right?
Yeah.
And then now where do you go from here, and how does that change things? How do you pivot, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. Falling short in this sport is very tough. I grew up and I was a wrestler before the sport of mixed martial arts, which is such a hard sport. But when it comes to failing, it teaches you how to fail, because you get the opportunity to get back in the win column very soon, very quickly. You could lose a wrestling match on Wednesday, but then on Saturday, you get another opportunity to throw yourself into another tournament, get some wins, have some success, get your hand raised. With the sport of mixed martial arts, I fought in May. I'm not going to have the opportunity to get my hand raised again until November, so there's such a long time where doubts and fears and insecurities and I told you so's can creep in, especially when you get to the platform that is being a UFC fighter. It's just such a bigger platform. All eyes are on you. Every move you make, every word you say, people dissect it and they go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and you hear a lot of doubt and a lot of naysayers. But it's for me, once again, and this is why I think it's so important for people, just from a self-improvement standpoint, to see where you're at today and look back in your past and see where there has been a similar occasion, a similar circumstance that you're going through currently. And for me, I got shot out of a cannon. I was a world champion within 18 months of me coming into the sport, beat Eddie Alvarez. I was the top 3 guy in the entire world, booked as, the new kid on the block, the next best thing coming into mixed martial arts. But then I suffered my first setback, and immediately I made 3 mistakes. I wanted to hide from everybody. I wanted to hide from my loss. I wanted to hide from the media. I didn't take interviews. I didn't want to be even shown. I wasn't posting on social media. And then the second mistake I made was that I had skill amnesia. All of a sudden in my mind, I thought, okay, because I lost this fight, I lost all of the skills that I had acquired over the last decade and a half in wrestling. And I lost my speed, my quickness, my stamina, my power, my cardio. Yet really I didn't lose any physical attributes. The only attributes I lost were mental, my self-image, my self-concept, the way that I saw myself. And then the third mistake
And that translated to your skills.
Yeah. And then it translates into your skills, because then you start, finding reasons to believe the lies that, okay, well, you're just not as good as you thought you were, and then you make that third mistake of finding yourself in the jail cell of self-pity, blaming other people and justifying and getting a little bit lazy. And if it wasn't for that ref, if it wasn't for that judge, if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for her, and those are three mistakes that I made. So, and I've had setbacks since I lost that first fight. And that first fight actually turned into two more subsequent losses. I went 688 days without winning a fight, almost 2 full years without winning a fight, which is for a fighter, almost basically a career death sentence. And I came out of that, won another world title, but I've had losses along the way. And I've always gone back to that moment and those three things, reminding myself, I can't hide. I can't forget how good I am. And I can't wallow in self-pity and start blaming other people. So when I lost this last fight, it's much easier to lose a title. It's the hardest thing, but also much easier to lose in a world title fight in the UFC, because you're fighting essentially the best guy in the world. Charles Oliveira is the best of the best. It could have been Poirier, it could have been it could have been Gaethje, it could have been any of these top guys, and they're all a gnat's eyelash away from beating each other at any given moment. They're the top of the crop when it comes to the guys at 155. So it was a setback, and it was tough, but it was also like, okay, well, you lost, you got caught. It's a game of inches, you can look at all the positives that happened in the fight. You can look at how big the promotion was, how big it built my platform, and just having that opportunity, and even just the experience. I've only spent 6 or 7 minutes in the UFC octagon.
That's wild to think about, is like how it's easy to say how little a time it is when you're sitting on the sidelines. It's a lot different when you're actually in there and somebody's trying to, strangle you or punch you and kill you essentially.
Yeah, no, for sure. And those are thoughts that we had too. Hey, there's some guys inside the top 10 that, 10, 9, 8 number that would be a little bit easier fights than Justin Gaethje. Why don't we go get one of those, go get it's never a tune-up fight in the UFC. All these guys are tough, but there's a little bit easier fights than Justin Gaethje. And there was that thought, maybe my management threw it out there, and I was like, man, as I said, I'm not here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. I want to fight every single one of these top guys that I possibly can and test my skills. Win, lose, or draw, either way, every fan that is there is going to see the passion, see the masterpiece that I'm painting, and be entertained, be on the edge of their seats when Michael Chandler steps inside the UFC octagon. So I want to fight the best guys I possibly can. That's why I called out Justin Gaethje, wanted to fight him. He's the number 2 guy in the world. I think it puts me kind of in that position to have another title shot very soon after, if not right after. So take the biggest risks you possibly can while you have the ability and have the opportunity, and that's what we're doing.
So that's your fight in November then, is Gaethje.
November 6th, Justin Gaethje.
Nice, man. We'll be watching that.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm curious about is obviously, anybody who's followed you or knows a little bit about you obviously knows you're an exceptional fighter, your work ethic. I mean, I see you on Instagram doing your workouts, and it's unreal to me and most normal people. So I don't think that's a question, but I'm really curious about your skill set or your thoughtfulness about marketability. Yeah. Like how do you show up where you actually draw a crowd, where people, because you're an easy guy to root for. There's a lot of people who are great and exceptional fighters who are hard to root for because they're a-holes or whatever else. You're an easy guy to root for. Is that something that you're thoughtful about, that you're mindful about? Is the performative aspect of the game?
Not when it comes to, promoting for the fights and trash talk or saying certain things that are going to get people to talk. I mean, truthfully, it's so interesting too, because now that there is such a large crowd of witnesses seeing everything that I say and everything that I do, there's a lot of people who just think I'm ingenuine, or I'm not my genuine self, or I'm being fake, or I sound scripted, or I sound, I sound like I wrote it all down and then just regurgitated. But the funny thing about that is, by me being my authentic self, some people just don't understand or can't quite grasp that this is just who I exactly am. This is exactly who I am. I'm being my authentic self. Because a year or two ago, I did some work with a mindset coach named Jim Hensel, who works with Rich Froning and a bunch of other CrossFit people.
Yeah, I know of them.
And one of the biggest things that we always came back to in me trying to find a way to organize all my values and me being the most successful I possibly can is me always showing up as my authentic self. I have a tendency to shrink at times, to not make myself sound too overconfident or over boisterous, not to make other people feel insecure around me.
Sure.
I have an ability to show up into a crowd and shrink and not be my authentic self. So I've made a promise to myself after going through that is no matter what, be your authentic self, be exactly who you are. And if that means you need to show how confident you are, you need to show how eloquently that maybe you can speak or answer this question, just do it. Don't mince words. Don't be afraid to rub people the wrong way. Because at some point, pleasing everybody only leads to disaster, So I don't think a ton about the marketability aspect. I just try to be my authentic self and let the cards fall where they may. I think it just so happens that, a guy like yourself or guys like us who have similar values, similar interests. We love our country. We love what we're doing. We're passionate about what we're doing. We're passionate about our marriage. We're passionate about being fathers. And we're passionate about finding the best version of ourselves. That resonates with a lot of people. It resonates with a lot of people. I was just a small guy from a small town who was taught to do small things. And I somehow didn't listen to the limiting beliefs in the story that was being told to me that I was going to eventually live out. And I was able to break free of that. And I think there's a lot of kids, especially young men around this country in small towns everywhere and big cities everywhere around this country that story and that kind of that thought process resonates with. And I think that's where I've gained kind of the biggest platform, and I really enjoy it because I think we are all born with so much more than we give ourselves credit for, so much more talent, so much more abilities, and so much more capabilities. And I lived way under those for so many years, and I'm trying not to do that every single day now.
That's I really like, and I think this is part of the reason people enjoy watching you fight and watching your career is because you two talk about being this small town kid. And one of the most interesting comments that I get from other people who listen to this podcast is they say things like, I would like to hear from a regular guy. And when I hear that, I think Michael Chandler's a regular guy. Jocko Willink, Andy Frisella, like David Goggins. These are all regular guys. Like all of us are regular guys. It's just that you've taken your skill set and you've improved it, you've adjusted it, you've developed it, you've enhanced it. And would you say the same thing?
I do. Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. And it is true. Whenever some kid from some small town who had dreams of leaving those county lines and going somewhere, that was me. I was a wrestler, for crying out loud. I wasn't the star quarterback. I wasn't a star point guard of one of the big sports that people,
right.
And then go to the NBA
right.
and it's so I think for me, I always had that kind of just blue collar, work really hard, small guy from a small town kind of mentality. I didn't listen to that, thank God. But I think I am just a regular guy who somehow found himself where I'm at today, sitting here talking to you. And but it's only because I didn't make it too big. I didn't make it bigger than it needed to be. I still look at myself as a normal guy. I still was walking through Target just yesterday and three younger dudes came up and they were so pumped to like meet me and take a picture. And I was like, holy cow, like this is nuts. Cause I'm just a regular guy. I wake up in the morning, I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else, just like The Rock, just like your favorite rapper, just like your favorite country artist, just like Jeff Bezos. We all are just human beings on this earth trying to figure out exactly what it is that makes us tick, what makes us passionate, what makes us want to wake up in the morning excited. For me, thank God I found it for now. Over the next couple of years, I'll be, I'm going to retire in the next couple of years. And then I move on to the next thing that drives me, the next thing that I can live out my purpose. But I just think we, especially this day and age in the social media, even this opportunity to be on your platform, this elevates me even more because I continue to get more and more opportunities like this. And I have a large following on social media, but you got to remember that large following, that 1 million followers started at just one, you know, and then it went to 10 and then it went
your
to
mom,
100.
right? It's like,
Exactly. Right. It was my mom, my couple of high school buddies, you know,
that's right.
A couple of guys I train with. That's where it starts. And I think this has been a long, long process as well. I think the idea of looking at somebody's chapter 20 instead of and comparing yourself to someone's chapter 20. If there's a 20-year-old kid who's a young mixed martial artist who has the goal of becoming a UFC champion, he can't look at where I'm at today. He has to look back at my chapter 1, where I started, and I was just a regular guy, and I still am just a regular guy. But with the age of social media, everything is just constantly being thrown in your face, and we see other people's success constantly. And we're seeing 18-year-old kids making $250,000 a month selling gummy bears on TikTok and doing silly videos. So the idea.
I don't know about that actually. How do we do that?
Exactly. But these are the kind of things that are happening, and it's so great because people can, you know, pad their wallets, but how do you become a thriving spirit, not just a thriving bank account and a thriving number of followers, but how do you have a thriving spirit? And unfortunately, we're gonna continue to grow up in a day and age where it almost becomes so easy to become successful that we're forgetting that hard work, doing things right, and operating with integrity are the 3 most important things that you can possibly do. So I don't know. I kind of went on a tangent, went that way, but I think it all still goes back to looking at yourself as just a normal human being, just a regular guy. And I just pray I can keep that same mindset and humility throughout the rest of my life.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to work because you're aware of it. And so I wrote that down. I'm just taking notes as you're talking, as you said, not making this bigger than it is. But then there's the other side of it too. And I think a lot of guys buy into this, that they'll say to themselves, well, I am just a regular guy. And they'll put so much weight on that they limit themselves to what they could be. And you said, I didn't buy into that. Where does that mentality come from? Is that something that is inherently you? Is it relationships that you've had? A lot of the guys that I've had on the podcast have what I would say is a healthy chip on their shoulder, where they've had an experience and they vowed never to let that happen again. Where does that mentality for you come from?
Man, I tell you what, because I talk about this story a lot because it's my story, and I always get asked that question, and I can honestly say there's nothing in my past or in my circle of family and friends, teammates, training partners, that would ever point to me making that decision. When I say I'm the only person that made that decision that I know of from where I grew up, I am literally the only person that made that decision of the people in my high school, in my town. I was the only person. So it didn't make sense it didn't make sense why I did it. All I can say is that you pray for wisdom, and you pray for discernment, and you pray that you can make the best decision possible, whether that decision is the scariest thing in the world, whether you see an open door, but you're afraid to walk through that open door, but for some reason you have to make that decision. That's why it's important to just pray for the discernment. He who lacks wisdom, pray for wisdom, and it will be given to you by your God. I think it's James 1:5, and that was a scripture that my father-in-law actually sent me as I was going to my meeting with the UFC, because
that's pretty cool. Your father-in-law sent that to you?
My father-in-law sent that to me, and it was just so cool because it was really actually the first time that I really read that scripture, I think. But it holds so much weight, because instead of just trying to have wisdom, or instead of just praying, you know, God, let your will be done, just pray for wisdom, pray for constant wisdom and discernment. Because now, since making that decision, now the proof is in the pudding. By making that decision, my life has changed to a trajectory that I never thought was possible. As that young 18-year-old small guy from a small town who was taught to do small things, the trajectory of my life is not just tenfold, but 100-fold, 1,000-fold bigger and more impactful, and a bigger platform than I ever thought was even possible. So it's having gratitude for that. But I think it goes back to praying for wisdom and the discernment to make those decisions, and just kind of unbelievable courage, if you will. Because to me, I look at that 18-year-old, that was unbelievable courage. I don't even believe that that young man was able to make that decision, that kind of courageous decision. So pray for unwavering and unbelievable courage, in your decision making, in the paths that you're going to go down, because you may not see it today or tomorrow or next week, but eventually it's going to come to the point where you make that decision. You look back and say, it was that decision that was the catalyst to me becoming the man that I was supposed to be.
You obviously talk a lot about your faith and God. And one of the things you said earlier is that you have these God-given abilities. And then there's this other side of things where, yes, I believe that's true. And I believe all of us have these certain abilities, some different than others, of course. But then there's also the enhancement of those abilities, because there's a lot of people out there who have been given abilities, but don't use them, don't train them, don't develop them. So how do you find that relationship between what God has blessed you with naturally and what you feel like you've developed or have the responsibility to develop?
It all goes back to mindset. 100%. It goes back to mindset. I mean, I've being an athlete now since fully investing myself in athletics from the time that I was 14 years old. I've seen so many young men that were more talented than me. They were the most talented kids on the teams. They were the most talented kids in college, and now the most talented kids in mixed martial arts, young men in mixed martial arts. But the people who consistently show up when the lights turn on, that's either just an innate, inherent ability to just show up and do it and not think twice. I think some of that is God-given, or some of that is just the way people are designed. You got certain people, there's a guy on my team who's fighting next week, actually, who he doesn't take training. I don't want to say he doesn't take training seriously, because he trains hard and whatnot, but he doesn't overthink it. If he has you never see him have a bad day. You never see him down on himself. Whereas me, I'm over here in the corner wanting to kick a hole in the wall.
That's how I am
rip
too.
Rip it off my gloves and I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, or I'm more passionate or less passionate than he is. But then fast forward to his fight night, when the lights come on, he goes out there and he performs so dang well. And he overperforms under the lights, whereas so many people underperform whenever the lights come on. So it all goes back to that mindset of being able to show up when the lights come on, but also just realizing that, man, this whole thing is a journey. Early in my career, it was such a blessing to get shot out of a cannon and become top 3 and world champion within 18 months and beating Eddie Alvarez, who was the number 3 guy in the world at the time. It was unheard of. I was 1,000-to-1 underdog, right? So I beat him, and I immediately put myself in this position of world champion, the guy who's the new guy who everybody's saying, hey, he needs to go to the UFC. He needs to go fight Benson Henderson, who was the champion at the time. And immediately I went from loving the sport, having a blast, enjoying the process, to trying to be perfect every single day. Because as soon as I won that belt, I showed up to practice. And if a guy lands a punch on me, all of a sudden, now I'm not perfect. If the guy gets a takedown on me, or I don't get a takedown on him, all of a sudden, now I'm not perfect. I focus so much on being perfect instead of just showing up and trying to be successful that day, trying to be better that day, and embracing the process. So I think that's one of the aspects that doesn't get enough attention, because so many people, and there's this idea that people boast about of being a perfectionist. I'm just a perfectionist. I got to get that to me is always going to lead to pain and to failure, because you're never, ever going to be perfect. You're never, ever going to perform perfectly. You might perform near perfectly. It might be a flawless performance, but it's never going to be perfect. And that's what happened to me. As soon as I won that first world title, I took on the pressure of the entire MMA media that was touting me as the next big guy, and all my training partners and all my coaches and all the, my coaches from back home at Mizzou who were excited for me to go into mixed martial arts. I started shouldering all this pressure, which propelled me into perfectionism, when really I just needed to be so focused on being successful instead of being perfect. And that also goes back to, now that I'm saying this, these young men or young women who are pursuing something, who have a lot of talent. It's so important to work hard and be mentally built up, your self-image, but also who you're surrounding yourself with. The idea of success, not perfection, came from my best friend and mentor, Chris Patterson. One day I called him just freaking tears in my eyes, just probably cussing up a storm, not very happy, and he's just like, Michael, well, it sounds like you're trying to be perfect. I'm like, yeah, I gotta be perfect. I'm the world champion. I'm this, I'm that. Ariel Helwani said this. And he's like, well, sounds like you just need to focus on being successful and not be perfect. You're never going to be perfect. And without having that type of person in my life, that type of mentor, that type of voice, that was probably his straight discernment from God, and to have that wisdom in that moment to excel or spread into my soul at that moment, I immediately was like, okay. And immediately I felt a lot less pressure. That 800-pound gorilla that had been on my shoulders immediately fell off, and I was able to turn things around and get better, So working hard, focusing on your mental health, your mindset, and then surrounding yourself with the best people possible. That's kind of the recipe to go from extremely talented to extremely talented and a guy or a gal who can perform whenever the lights come on.
This concept of perfectionism is very interesting, because what I've seen in myself, just as much as anybody else, is that if we want to be perfect, it's usually a perception thing. Like, I want people to see me a certain way, right? It's manufactured. And then what I think it causes people to do, at least this is what's been true of me, is I won't put myself into arenas where I can't be the best or I can't be perfect. I've even thought about that to a lesser degree, of course, than you, with jujitsu over the past 3 years, which is how long I've been training jujitsu. It's very easy for me to go to a default position or a default submission attempt because I know I can get it. Like, but how is that going to serve me if I'm not willing to experiment, to try something new, or to get caught, or to put myself in a vulnerable position where somebody else might get the better of me? Like, we don't want to deal with that. We just want to deal in the arena where we know we can get, and that's it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we all have to admit that that's derived from ego, right?
Yes.
And I've done it too. Trust me. I only say that. I'm not calling you out. I'm calling both of us out, and all of us out as men, especially. We default to these things that we know are comfortable. But if you really were able to look back at all the different decisions that you made, where you played it safe, or where you didn't take a chance, or where you didn't go into an arena where you knew there was a good chance or a high likelihood that maybe you're not going to be successful, you're not going to get the gold medal, you're not going to get the results that you want, but you become a better man, a better competitor, a better father, a better husband, a more galvanized man by throwing yourself into that fire, and that's one thing that the sport of mixed martial arts has taught me. And people always ask me, why are you, what are you thinking before you go out there? Do you get nervous? And I really don't get nervous, because I get excited about the opportunity of throwing myself into an arena, literally and figuratively, inside of a cage, inside of the fire, excited, win, lose, or draw, that I'm becoming a better man and being galvanized by the fire that I'm throwing myself into, and it's, I have an ego, and I have confidence, and I am proud of who I am and what I've built and what I've done, but I never let the fear of looking bad hold me back, because that was what a young Michael Chandler used to do. I would shrink myself, and I would pull myself away from things that I was afraid of, where I knew I couldn't be 100% for sure successful. We don't follow people because of the virtual certainty of their unblemished record, or that the virtual certainty of them being successful. We follow people because they take chances, and we see them take those chances, and it inspires us. And then even more so when they fall flat on their face, just like I did back when I fought for the UFC title, the way that I'm able to pull myself back up, dust myself off. May 15th, the sun went down, and then it rose right back up on May 16th. And I got another opportunity to move forward in the face of adversity, and with complete disregard to that previous failure and my future opposition. And that's an opportunity that I don't take lightly. That's an opportunity that people can see, that this small guy from a small town, this normal everyday guy, threw himself into the fire. Yeah, he fell short, but at least he was the man in the arena who failed while daring greatly. At best, I walk out of there with the UFC belt on my shoulder. At worst, I failed while daring greatly. The man in the arena quote. It's just it's a metaphor for this life, and it's a metaphor for this sport. And that's why I think people are drawn to mixed martial arts, because what we do inside that octagon is a physical manifestation of the fights that all of us are going through every single day. And I'm just so thankful that I get the opportunity to having done it as long as I have. And every single fight is another blessing, and another opportunity to kind of just capture the attention and hopefully instill the taking a chance mentality into other people, because it has served me well over the last decade and a half. And I got a lot more chances to take, a lot more bets on myself, and it's going to be a lot more fun.
Man, you're so right about people wanting to see somebody get back up. You know, we see champions get knocked down, and I'm talking about champions in the ring or just champions of life get knocked down. And I kind of like hold my breath a little bit and just look and say, okay, what's this guy going to do now? You know, what's he going to do now? Because that's really, to me, what actually matters. And that, I think, is more reflective of his character than what he did when he was on top of everything.
100%. It's the reason the Rocky franchise is one of the biggest franchises of all time. Like,
sure.
if Rocky, there would not have been 4 Rocky, or what was it, 6 Rocky movies or whatever it is. I always say 4 because 4 is my favorite, but
that's all that matter, right? Somebody's going to be upset I just said that, but that's all that matters.
Exactly. But there would not have been so many Rocky movies if Rocky just won every single time. You know, I hate it. It almost sounds counterintuitive, because of course, as an athlete, I want to win. I wish I was, actually, no, I don't wish. I almost said I wish I was undefeated, but I don't, because the losses are what has galvanized me. The falling short, the setback, that has what has fashioned me through, for better or worse, through pain and through trial and tragedy and triumph, through it all the mixture of emotions, those losses and those setbacks and those injuries and all that pain and the tears that were shed and the bad days, those were the things that have fashioned me into the man that I am today. So it's exactly like what you said. We almost are more intrigued when people fall short, because we all have shortcomings. We all have setbacks. We all have doubts, insecurities, and fears. So when we watch somebody from afar fail, we get the opportunity to be inspired by how they respond, and luckily for me, I've luckily and unluckily, I guess, whatever it is, it's all just part of the process, that I've had these losses, that I've had these setbacks, and I've had the opportunity to, hopefully touch some people with my performances, with my wins, with my knockouts, with my great highlights, but also with my setbacks in my career.
Yeah, you said lucky or unlucky. I think it's subjective. It's going to happen, right? Like the loss or the win happens. It either happens or doesn't happen. And here's how it played out. And the way that you view it or how you define it is really just the way you're looking at it. If you want to say it's unlucky, then that's unlucky. If you want to say it's the most horrible thing that ever happened to you, then maybe it is. But you could view it a different way. Yeah,
it's the old Jocko Good video, right?
That's right.
Like,
this
bad thing happened. Good. I had a bad day. Good, right? And it's almost so that to me is hard for maybe a lot of people to understand, but you can only build that kind of mentality by throwing yourself into the fire and having so many failures that you eventually become numb to them, and you almost you have the ability to embrace them, and you'll never be able to fully embrace change, failure, setback, and losses without going through them and constantly putting yourself in situations where you have maybe a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. We have 70-30 chance of losing, right? Put yourself into those kind of situations. Find ways to expand your human capacity through failure, So, because obviously, as an athlete, I always want to win. That's the goal every single time. I don't train like I do and go be away from my family.
I really hope I lose today.
Collect a paycheck. But man, you gotta be okay with the uncertainty that's about to happen. You have to embrace the uncertainty, and win, lose, or draw. I always go back to my God still loves me, my family still loves me, and most importantly, I still love me. Because without me truly loving myself and accepting myself, those other two are not going to get the love and the attention that they truly need. And I only say that because I've been that guy who didn't love myself like I should have. I had all these abilities and all these gifts and all these opportunities and such a blessed life. Yet I kept looking at myself like I was less than, looking at myself like I deserved the short end of the stick, or I deserved to not be wildly successful. And I've gotten to the point now where I want people to live that abundance type of lifestyle and have an abundance mentality more than the scarcity mindset of my past.
One of the words you used was numbness, and I just want to be very clear, because I didn't take it this way, but you're not talking about numbness or indifference to loss. Like, each one of those losses stings, but you're not attaching weird sorts of meaning like I'm a perpetual loser, or I shouldn't be doing this anymore. That's what you're referring to.
Absolutely. No, great clarification, because it brings me back to one of my favorite ideas of all time. The great Zig Ziglar said, failure is an event, not a person. And that's what I mean by numbing yourself to it. You got to numb the emotion out of it, because we're all emotional creatures. You know, we all have these emotions, and we have to be in control of our emotions. And we also have to know when our emotions are a good thing and when they are a bad thing. And after a loss, it's okay to feel the emotions. I sobbed like a baby after this last fight. It was just me and my wife. You know, I stayed up all night reliving the moment, plus the fight adrenaline, plus everything. I couldn't sleep, so I had many hours that night to think about it. But I've changed my mindset to realizing that May 15th was an event in which I failed, but I am not a failure. And the old Michael would have immediately started to attach, well, I guess I'm not as good as I thought I was, or I guess the media was right. That this guy said I was going to eventually fizzle out, or I didn't do this, or I should have done that. And realizing that failure is an event, not a person. And realizing that every single person that you look up to, every single person that you love, every single person that you admire has at one time or another been a quote unquote failure. And they went down a road, they threw themselves into the arena, and they fell flat on their face. And when you start to realize that every single person that you look up to has failed, and every single person that you admire has encountered setbacks, or even huge setbacks, and like bankrupt people. Your favorite businessman might have gone bankrupt. Your favorite fighter, if I'm your favorite fighter, there's not too many people who have lost 3 fights in a row, went 688 days without a win, and come back from that. These are the type of epic failures or events that were failures that most people would write off and say, well, that's just a career. That's career suicide. His career is over. Yet we're able to come back, pull ourselves back. And now maybe you could call me a success story. Maybe you could call me a work in progress. Either way, I'm focused on the task at hand. I'm focused on not even winning belts and making money and doing all these things as much as I am the moment that I take my gloves off for the last time, looking back at the last, decade and a half that I fought, and realize and being proud of the man that I became with the opportunities that I had in the battles, figuratively and literally, that I fought inside of a cage with 4-ounce gloves on.
Do you consider it strange or weird or surreal that you fight other human beings for a living? From the outside looking in, that's a weird thing. I'm not sure if you've been in it so long that it's like not even a thing, or if that's something that you've considered before.
Man, it's not. And it's weird too. Like, even when you talk about my faith, people will say, well, how are you a Christian? But you also
right. I was actually going to ask that.
Yeah,
that's one of the things I wanted to discuss.
Of course. But I think for me, I've just been engaged in hand-to-hand combat, whether it was wrestling or fighting, since I was 14 years old. 21 years I've been putting my hands on an opponent who's about my size and trying to either score points on them, break them mentally, physically, spiritually, not really trying to hurt them. And that's not, and truthfully, just to kind of get into the psychology of mixed martial arts, I've never once wanted to hurt a guy in fighting. I've never once hoped that I break a guy's arm, leg, knock him out, break his, well, I want to knock him out, but I don't want to inflict really bad bodily harm. You
don't want to injure somebody.
No, the best goal is for me to go out there, get a knockout, him come to, me get my hand raised, us shake hands, maybe buy each other a beer later after the fight. And because, man, if there's anybody out there that I respect out of anybody, it's the guys who do what I do. They train every single day to put themselves, they toe the line, they put themselves in a cage and fight with 4-ounce gloves, So, so to me, it's never been I don't know. It's never been something that I've looked at as even hostile in the cage. When you're watching it, man, you're like, gosh, Chandler fights with hostility. He fights with violence. He fights with a tenacity that he looks like he wants to rip your head off. And that's what I need to be successful in my sport.
Sure.
But in my heart, in my soul, inside my DNA, I don't look for fights. I'm not a confrontational guy. Quite frankly, I'm a very non-confrontational guy. That's why trash talk hasn't really ever been my thing. I'd be much more nervous getting into a trash talk battle on camera than I would be just fighting fisticuffs on camera. So it's not surreal. It only becomes a little bit surreal here and there when I see genuine respect and fan reactions from people. Like I brought up these guys from Target the other day. It's so surreal and it's so humbling. Like these guys really thought I was freaking cool. Like these guys, these guys thought, and I feel weird even talking about it because I don't want to brag on myself, and I'm not any cooler than anybody. I think it's almost just baffling to me that these young men were. It was like the way I would be if I saw The Rock, or I saw one of these guys that I admire like crazy, right? And it's just so surreal to me because once again, it does go back to me still seeing myself as a small guy from a small town who was taught to do small things. And it's baffling to me, but it's such a humbling feeling. It's such a humbling experience for me, so that's when it becomes a little bit surreal, realizing that what I'm doing really is bigger than I think it is at times. These opportunities and these platforms that I have and these fights that I'm having that are going to live on the internet forever and ever and ever. And then I think about 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 18-year-old Hap, my son, watching what his dad did for a living, and then reading the comments. And, there's going to be some negative ones, but hopefully a lot of positive comments of other people saying things about me, because I can sit there and say, hey, son, I was this and I was that, and I won this and I won that. But the rubber meets the road, and you really impact my son will be really impacted whenever he hears who his dad is or was from other people, from his peers, from his coworkers, from his support system, his followers and his fans. And that's my real goal for me, because I can tell him how great I am till I'm blue in the face, which I don't do often, or probably won't do ever. But that's where he's really going to be impacted and get kind of that view and that vision of what I'm doing over these last decade and a half.
It's amazing to me when you hear a man like yourself who has that long-term vision. I think so many people are so trapped and caught up in what's happening now and how are people perceiving me and how much money am I making today? And some of that, of course, you need to be aware of some of that. But if you can keep that long-term perspective, like you're talking about it now, I think it causes us to make better decisions in the moment. We're not so emotionally wrapped up in it. We're not pursuing the wrong things that are sexy and fun now that are going to have negative consequences down the road. It's a level of grounding that more of us need to incorporate in our lives.
100%. I think, and it kind of goes back to embracing the process, not even what if the goal is just the process, what is the goal? What if the goal is just embracing the process? It's not the gold belt. It's the process for me to get to the gold belt. It's not the $1 million. It's the process for me to get to the $1 million, and I think having that kind of perspective helps you, as you said, live in the moment more, and also deal with adversity more. Just because I failed today doesn't mean that I'm never going to win that belt. I'm never going to make that $1 million. I'm never going to be successful in this thing. I'm never going to be able to capture and acquire that thing that I'm chasing. Just because I failed today doesn't mean I'm not going to be able, that I have to close the door on that. The sun really does come up again tomorrow, and I get another opportunity, another crack at it, another chance. And you got to have that in my sport. I had a bad day today. I might have a bad night tonight here in a couple hours training again. So you just kind of get that you roll with the punches, literally and figuratively, right? It's metaphoric, and and that's why I feel so blessed that this sport is what it is, and it's different, and it's impactful, and it has given me a great opportunity. So I'm forever indebted to the sport of mixed martial arts, how big the promotion is and how big the platforms are. So it's an awesome, humbling feeling.
What do you say to those people, to go back to what you were saying a minute ago about how can you be a Christian and pursue this lifestyle? What do you say to somebody who might bring that up or mention that or think that?
No, it's a great thought. I can tell you right now, I've spoken at more churches about my career and about my path than I have in secular venues. You know, I've spoken at more churches, more men's conferences and men's retreats than I have in any other venue. You know, there's a place in Christianity for my type of career. You know, first of all, I train with a lot of people that are Christians. I train with a lot of people who love Jesus. I train and also I in a non-confrontational way, without sugarcoating it, I would say to you, who are you to tell me what my mission is and what my way of spreading the gospel is? You know, who are you to say that just because I fight in a cage that it must not be from God? Who are you? You know, I don't think Tim Tebow ever once apologized for running over somebody on the goal line on a quarterback sneak. You know, maybe giving them a concussion, maybe flat backing them. You know, I don't think Christians in other sports who may you know, be in other contact sports, I don't think they've ever apologized for doing bodily harm within the confines of the rules of the sport. And mixed martial arts is no different. If mixed martial arts is my vehicle to have a platform for my voice to be heard, and in turn, and I don't talk about my faith a ton. I don't preach the gospel on a lot of platforms. I don't talk about my faith a ton. I think people see the way that I live my life. They hear the little things that I say here and there, the way that I refer to my faith, or the way that I refer to the way that I live. And that's my way of doing it. That's what I've never felt conviction about it, that I need to speak about my faith for. And I've never felt led to speak about it any more than I already do. I feel confident, and I feel comfortable with the amount that I speak about my faith. And I think people can just see in the way that I live and the things that I do. And if they don't like it, they were never really going to like it anyway, or I just eventually wear them down. You know, when I came into the UFC, a lot of people didn't like me because I immediately got the backup for the world title shot. And then I fought Dan Hooker, and then I got a title shot, my second fight in the UFC. And everybody's like, I don't like this guy. Why is he getting these opportunities when all these other people deserve it more? I completely agree with you for that notion and for that process, that thought process. But eventually, the amount of people that have sent me messages or reached out to me and said, you know what, I didn't like you at first, but now after hearing this interview or listening to this, or seeing the way that you love your son, or seeing this about you, man, I feel like you're my favorite fighter now. And I silently chuckle with a little smile on my face, because these things take time. You're not going to, number one, you're not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but you're also not going to be everybody's cup of tea right away. Eventually, you just keep doing what you need to do, be authentically yourself. And the ones that want to attach themselves, and the ones that want to pay attention and kind of jump onto what you're thinking about, talking about, and what you stand for, will eventually become part of your circle.
Yeah. Well, brother, I'd love to get you up here to Maine sometime. We're actually doing a Origins immersion camp right now. I snuck away for a couple hours so you and I could have this conversation. But awesome. We got to get you up here. Maybe when you're not in fight camp, Jocko's up here and all the Origin guys are up here. So we'd love to have you up here in person at some point.
I would love to, man. This is so cool. I love your platform, your message, what you're doing. So thank you for the great conversation. Thank you for what you're doing as we continue to try to build men up and build great leaders, because without them, the world falls pretty quick. So thank you for being 100%. Exactly who you are and exactly what this podcast and what this platform is. So appreciate you, man.
Thank you, man. We're going to be rooting for you come November. I used to say good luck. It's not about good luck. I'll give you best wishes. I know you're going to take it within your hands and God's hands and make the most of it, whatever comes. So stoked about it for you, brother.
That's right. That's why we say, I'll see you at the top.
That's right. All right, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate you, Michael.
Thanks, Ryan. See you, brother.